Hi, I'm Nikki from Gracie's House and I'm a brand ambassador for Redesign with Prima. Okay, so today we're going to be working with the rust pastes from Redesign with Prima. This particular set is the metal rust set. It comes in the three colours, the brown, the orange and the green. So today I'm going to be working with just the two colours, the brown and the orange from the metal rust set. So I'm going to start with the brown and we're going to kind of create a base around the edges. We're going to try and create a natural rusty finish. So when there's a joint, the effect that I'm aiming for is to create that this is actually a metal chest of drawers. So when metals join together, that tends to be the weak point, so that's where we want rust. So I'm looking for applying it around these edges because that's kind of where those high points, paint might get chipped. We'd be looking at seams here, that's the aim. So these rust pastes have got quite a lot of texture to them, they're quite gritty. There's let me just see if I can, I'm not sure I can show on camera how much grit there is, but they've got quite a grainy texture. So I'm using a biggish dabbing brush. You can load the product on as much or as little as you want, but what I would say is it's easier to add layers rather than to try and take away if you feel like you've gone too heavy. So I'm going to be going around the edge of the inner edge where it sits against the furniture. I'm going to be coming down onto that diagonal and I'm really going to be concentrating on the corners. As I said, you can load up as much product as you want, you can keep adding, and once this is dry it gives you quite a grainy texture. So I'm just going to be adding around those corners. And then once we do this everywhere, we'll then add on the orange colour. And that really adds a lot of depth. Now rust isn't even, it's quite, there's no rhyme or reason to where it applies and where it kind of goes in more, more extreme. So I'm going to be adding some little bits that come further into our piece, into the drawers. And we're just going to keep building along. There is some other rust colours. They come in, I think there's 3 different sets with different colours in each of them. So I don't know if you can see that there's more texture coming here because I'd loaded up more product. And again, like we were saying, rust is very random. So I want that to be the case. I want there to be more texture in some areas and less. And as you're adding the product, it will naturally come away from the brush, so you'll have areas where there's less texture on the brush. There's less product, means less texture. I find these dabbing brushes are quite handy because you don't want to apply this in a normal kind of paintbrush motion. We're looking to create texture. So these little brushes really work to our advantage when that's the aim. Okay, let's just go around that edge as well. So I'm going to work down here and then I'll come back along here and then we'll add orange. So as you can see, I'm going quite heavy on the corners because naturally that would be a weaker point. Any kind of patina tends, although it's random, it has, I'm going to say, a random pattern. You can kind of guess where things would naturally start to rust. And I think this is great as well. It has such a contrast. I can't do that edge because I can't see it. It has such a contrast against this fantastic blue. Okay, and then just where I've got some product kind of getting dry, I can really pounce on and just give a real hint and just a suggestion that the rust is sort of creeping in further. Almost like you're dry brushing. Okay, and we can move on to the orange. Now I've got a smaller brush to apply the orange, so just a little artist brush, because you probably don't want to use as much of the orange as you have of the brown. Again, you can use as much as, you know, you could use more orange if you wanted to, but me personally, I think kind of when it gets to the orange stage, it's like doing its worst. So you have less of that, and that really pops against that brown. So I'm really working a lot on the corners, like I said before, on those diagonals, adding it, and as the product unloads off my brush, there's less there, but it's still giving me a little subtlety. We'll bring it down into some of these places here. And we're going to kind of go a bit heavier here because we've gone heavier and more textural on that piece of rust there, that patch. And you want to be quite kind of random with this one. So you might want to add it in places where you've not gone so much with the brown, just because you want that real randomness. And as this dries, as I said, it dries really, really very hard, and it will have texture. You can sort of sand it back if you feel it's a little bit too sharp in places. You might want to do that on pieces like this because they're going to be touched, you know, getting pieces of clothing in and out. I'm going to come down here. So now we've built up our orange. Obviously I will be adding it to down here, but because of my position, I'm not going to try and do that without seeing what I'm doing. We're going to add some sort of drippy stains, because obviously we know that when rust gets wet, it tends to drip down and create some staining. So I'm going to do that in some areas. But again, I don't want to have a massive amount on my brush. So I'm going to switch back to the brown, but I'm going to use the small brush for this. So I'm just going to take the worst of the orange product off, and I'm going to make this more of a dry brushing technique, a little like we were doing in some of those other areas. So this one here, I'm just going to very lightly create those rusty dribble. And I think maybe we'll do one over here as well. Like I said, it's a really subtle thing, and it's because that piece of metal isn't rusting yet. This is just being affected, the paint's being stained by the rust dribbling down. I'm just going to go a bit heavier there. And it does just make it look like the paintwork is stained by the rust. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to continue basically doing this, this technique. I'll do this on all of the drawers, and then we're going to move on and do the side panel, and we're going to do something a little bit different there. So we've moved around to the side of this piece now, and I've got this beautiful stencil from Redesign with Prima called Distressed Wallpaper. I've taped it loosely to the piece. I've not sprayed the back with adhesive or anything. Because we're using paste, I don't really have to worry about bleed through. So we're going to be working with the same two colours, the orange and the brown from the Metal Rust kit. And I'm going to be pouncing again through this to create like a rusted stencil effect. So I'm going to start with the brown again. We'll probably be using more of the brown than the orange. And basically, I'm just going to be holding the stencil against the piece, just so that, I mean, it won't bleed because it's not paint, but just so that we make sure we don't kind of get anything fall through. I'm going to put those down actually. I'll put that on my knee. There we go, that's easier. So I'm going to be going kind of all over with the brown, and then we'll pick places randomly to add in the orange. And because I'm going to be adding a frame on this as we did on the drawer fronts, I don't have to worry about it fitting right up because this has got an inset panel on this piece, but I don't have to worry about that terribly because I'm going to be adding more texture around the edges of those panels, because we're going to be creating that kind of seam effect, that metal seamed where the join would be. So again, very much the same as when we were applying it kind of freehand. You can put as much or as little product as you want on, you can build it up. This is quite a distressed stencil, so it's perfect because obviously we're talking about rust, we're not talking about something that's pristine and immaculate, so it, you know, it works with the fact that we're aiming for this distressed, rusty, patina kind of effect. I have taped it loosely on to try and help me. So as you can see, I've added some of it. There will be thicker sections, and some will be just, you know, that hint of rust that we were working on with the almost dry brushing. And you'll notice that as I kind of offload more product and as the brush becomes a bit drier, I'm using a bit more of a firm motion to push that product through the stencil. And when you've got more on there, you can just use a pouncing motion. And as the product becomes less and less, you might need to wiggle it about a bit. So we've got these little floral sections, which there's a lot kind of more stencil to work through, and then these pretty delicate lacy parts are a lot more, lot smaller. The sections are a lot smaller. So you might want to work that way and say, oh, on smaller lace sections, I'm not going to have so much product, and then go heavier on these sections here, the florals. But the key is to be random. So, you know, like we were talking about before on the front, on the drawers, you just want it to be as random as possible, because that's how rust kind of happens naturally in nature. I kind of think the inspiration for this was, you know, like a blue vintage truck sat in a yard, just getting aged and old and rusty. Okay, so we've just got this section left to do. That bit just does not want to stick there today. Whoops. Big blob dropped off there. So I'm really just pushing that product down into these more delicate areas as I spoke about before. I'm not too worried if we don't get that slipped a little bit actually. Let's see there. I'm not too worried if we don't have a massive amount of texture on those sections. And equally, I'm not too worried if we miss some sections there either. I'm going to get another piece of tape because all my tape's dropping. Let's just grab some tape. Let's do that. There we go. Nope. There we go. So we've just got a little bit of the orange to work through now. So I'm going to go back to my smaller brush like we did before. That just doesn't want to stay. And we're going to just go over in selected areas and add. And in some places that's going to mix where we've got more of the brown. I don't mind that. You've just got to kind of go with it and just add it where you fancy it. And if you come off with the stencil and you feel like there's some areas that you would like to add, you can just pop that stencil back over. It dries relatively quickly, but because it's not paint, you're not going to be messing with your design. As I said, we're not going to be having as much, that did drop a little bit there. We're not going to be having as much of the orange, so the orange sections won't take quite so long, but we can always go back and add some more if we want to. Push some down into there. Okay, let's take that off and just see how that's going to look. So there we go. So we've got this rusty, crusty kind of effect that we're working to. And what I'm going to do now is come back to my brown. I'm going to go with the small brush, so if it mixes a bit with the orange, I don't mind. And I'm going to go into these corners and add our brown as well. I'm going to also go down, see where we have these natural seams that are occurring because that's how the piece is put together. I'm going to be adding product down those lines because again, we were talking about joins and where metal gets joined, that's its weak point. So we're going to really try and follow how it would look if it was rusting for real. And we're going to go along this edge as well. And then we're going to continue down and kind of create a frame. And a bit like we did on those drawer fronts, I'm going to be adding it to the edge, and in some places that's going to come out further, and we're going to add that randomness to it. And it really, like I said before, it really pops against this blue. So I'm really pleased at the effect that we're kind of creating. I'm going to do a little bit of a drip there. One of our rust sort of dribbles. And that kind of is going to drip into the stencil work that we've just done. And get some texture in there. Some places we're adding more, some places we're adding less, and we're just continuing with that theme. And I'm just going to go down as far as that, but obviously we will fill that entire panel for the finished piece. My brush is full of product now. I can really feel the grain in the brush now, but it's great. When this dries, it has a really cool effect. So I'm going to just come along that top edge as well. So you can see by building up those layers, we're kind of creating this overall look. And I want this distressed, rusty, crusty kind of finish. Okay, let's get the orange back again. Where's the orange? There it is. And we'll just finish off with the highlights on the orange. Okay, so I think that's probably about as much as we're going to add at this stage, and then I would wait for that to dry, and then I'll see if there's any areas that I want to add to on my stenciled area. Obviously I'm going to continue and finish off those drawers. We'll get these panels done, and then it's a case of sitting back and seeing if there's anything else I want to add. So thank you for joining me. Just as a little recap, the products that we've been using today are the rust pastes from the metal rust kit, and I've just been particularly aiming on the brown and the orange.